speaker today is Nathan Scott, who's a consultant with Achieve Ag Solutions based in Victoria. Nathan has a background in prime lamb, merino wool and beef production, and a passion for improving the productivity and profitability of livestock enterprises. He works with producers to increase conception rates, improve lamb survival, lift growth rates and home overall management. Nathan provides advice to individual clients, works with a large number of producer groups, is a keynote speaker at industry events, and is involved with various industry projects. Nathan's talk today will cover the importance of goal setting and the role of EID in livestock businesses. I'll hand over to Nathan.
Thank you. All right, I just want to start off with a really simple question for all of you, and that is, what excites you? If I brought a 15-year-old kid in, sat them down here in front of you and said, all right, it's up to you guys. Tell us everything that excites you about our industry. What would you tell them? Now, I'm pretty lucky because I get to ask that question a lot in rooms full of people and I get the same blank looks. And it works beautifully for me. But it is a problem that we face. Part of it is how well are we articulating what is exciting within our industry. But the other part of it is what actually does excite us. Now, if we run with prices, because prices have been pretty good, apart from perhaps the wool price just over recent times, but prices have been pretty good. The problem is for that 15-year-old kid, by the time they enter the industry, we don't know where the prices are going to be by that point. So what is it that excites you? What's going to excite them about being part of our industry? Now, the challenge is that other industries have plenty to talk to them about. I'm just going to show you a very quick video. This one is about green-seeking technology from a company called Weed It. So basically they've designed a sprayer that only sprays the green weeds. Some of you will have seen this before, but the video is very good because it shows you just how good this is. To show you how well it works, they've laid weeds out in a pattern so that we'll play Beat It by Michael Jackson. Now, when we used to talk about cropping technology, it used to be auto steer. We used to be excited about auto steer. We don't even talk about it anymore, do we? Because it is just the way. Now, if I want to poke fun at our industry, and I can because I'm part of it, it's my industry too. If we look at the sheep industry as the example, we started out with a handpiece that looked like this, and now we've got blue ones, red ones, and yellow ones. And if that's an indication of the progress we're making, then that frustrates me. Now, I get told this all the time, that farmers won't change. I don't believe a word of it. A quick show of hands, just to prove this point. How many of you want to be better tomorrow than you were yesterday? Better next week than you were last week? Put your hand up, hold it up. Have a look around. Now, usually there's only two types of people who don't put their hand up. Either the ones that think they're pretty good already, or the ones that are about to retire and don't care anymore. The rest of you all put your hands up though. You all want to be better. The only way, there is only one way that you can be better, and that is to change. If we keep doing things the same way we've always done them, you'll keep getting the same results you've always got. So the only way that you can be better is to change, which means that this statement is crap. Because you all want to be better, we all want to change. It's the only way we can be better. I'm going to show you another quick video. This one's from TrueTest. It's not to give TrueTest a plug. I'm just very fortunate that they made a video about one of my clients. He happens to use TrueTest gear, so you're going to see some of that on the way, but it's not actually the equipment, it's not even his use of EID I want you to look at. I just want you to look at him and his approach to innovation.
I'm Gordon Brown. I've been a farmer. I was born into the industry. I've been in it all my life. When I was younger, you'd have a crowbar and a shovel, a brace and bit, drill, no electricity, no cordless drills. The tools we now have to work with are fantastic. If you start talking about EID tagging systems to keep control of your livestock, it's huge improvement. There's a lot of livestock that go across the borders, swapping state to state. There needs to be control. As a manager, you've got to make decisions for the well-being of the property and the livestock. You can make decisions with informed data. It begins obviously by purchasing the tags, and we manually insert a tag in their ear. We've got this set of scales, a three-way drafter. Every animal, as soon as it's weaned off its mothers, run through there to record the weight. We've got a spreadsheet with the top producing animals and the lower producing, so that decides whether we exit them or what sire lines, what genetics we use. There's many tools in our toolbox that we can use if we have the information in front of us to make that decision. I think there's huge improvements to the lamb industry, and this is all possible by using EID tags. It's made it easier, less guessing, more positive results, better for the industry, more profits, win-win situation. It's a no-brainer to me. I'm in boots and all. Farming's a tough gig. You know, there's a lot of manual work, a lot of dust, a lot of heat, a lot of cold. But we've got to use tools to improve the results. If we've got something that'll assist us, we've got to move forward and jump on board with that.
I'm very fortunate to have been able to work with Gordon for about the last 10 years. Gordon's the most innovative client that I work with. He just happens to also be the oldest client that I work with. And to me, that's something that the rest of our clients need to aspire to be. Every year we sit down and we review Gordon's results. And every year they are the best in terms of lamb survival, in terms of growth rates. They're the best across our client base. He doesn't have the best ground. He's not running on the best ground in our client base. But every year we get to the end and he says, yeah, but I reckon if we do this different next year, it'll be a bit better. Every year he's looking for something that he can do better. He can change. So my question to you is, what is it that you're actually trying to achieve? Because before we think about any of this technology, you have to have a goal in mind. You have to know what it is that you're setting out to achieve. Because while I've said we need the technology, we don't want technology for technology's sake. We want technology because it's going to help you achieve the outcome that you're trying to achieve. We should be looking for outcomes, not just silver bullets. But in terms of this, and I will refer to sheep a lot because that's the area that I've done a lot of work in EID in, but the concepts are exactly the same in cattle. They're just a bit bigger and they have got a bit less wool on them. The concepts are the same. In every population we deal with, we have this thing called population dynamics. We have a bell-shaped curve. We've got poor performers, average performers and superior performers. And in a traditional mob-based selection system, while we do try and identify those poor performers and kick them out, essentially what happens is that we end up with that same variation in every age group all the way through. You'll hear about people wanting to have a young flock, shorten the generational interval. It's because we've still got these passengers in the system. That's why we have to kick out a whole age group so that we can continue to improve our flock. Cattle, it's exactly the same. We just have them on the farm for even longer. I just ran out of space, but we're going to have them on the farm for a long time with some of those passengers in the system, depending on what trait it is that you're trying to chase. If you look at an individual-based system though, where we're actually tracking the performance of the individuals, we can kick out those poor performers as early as we possibly can. And then what we end up with is just those average and superior performers still in the system. And actually, on your place, whether we're talking cows or ewes, some of those oldest sheep on your farm are some of the best genetics on your whole place. Now that's a bit counterintuitive for a lot of you because we're always thinking about the shortening of the generational interval. But as long as she's still healthy, so we know that we get more metabolic disease and things like that with older sheep. But if she's still got good feet, she's still got good teeth, she could be some of the best genetics on your farm. And to put that into your own reality, if you're kicking out dries every year at scanning, if you're kicking out dries every year at landmarking, the fact that she's still there means she's been a bloody good performer. So they're some of the best genetics, and we're kicking them out because they've had a birthday. All we're doing really with all of this is we're grabbing that bell-shaped curve and we're giving it a shove. So it's still there, we've just dropped the bottom end off it. So at any point in the future, we can come back and we can take another slice off it. So there are two different things that we can achieve when we know the individuals. This generational change, which is the sheep that I'm left with from that generation today are better because of what I dropped out yesterday, but we can also achieve genetic gain because we are making cumulative genetic gain over time. Now that depends on the trait and how heritable it is, but we can make gains over time with it. And I want you to think about where your genetics are coming from, because I know, having looked around at some of the faces in the room, we've got some ram breeders here, but that's not the only place your genetics come from each time. It's not just the males. 50% of the progeny that stand in front of you is coming from the ewe portion or the cow portion. And how much are we doing? The bit that we can control is what happens on our farm. How much are we doing to try and make that extra progress? And if we look at what's happening in any group of animals, we know this variation exists. Whether it's in fleece value, whether they had singles, twins, what do they do over multiple years? Can we cull them to different flocks? Should they go to a terminal sire rather than going back to a maternal? We start thinking about what's coming in the future and we think about lean meat yield. We think about meat eating quality. There is so much going on that we don't know about. We look at a mob of sheep and we see a mob of sheep and we see the average. We see that we marked 140% lambs. Did we? What did they actually do? We've got sheep that did nothing. We've got ewes that sort of middle of the road weaned $100 worth of lambs, and then you'll get something like this that weaned $330 worth of lamb. We just don't know which one she is until we go looking for it. We want to find those guys and we want to kick these ones out. That's the whole concept. I think as an industry we need to breed less pretty and more productive and more profitable. That's what we're chasing. We are often distracted, and it's human nature, we are often distracted by what looks good. And I've got a really good example of how that comes into play a bit later on. So, comes back to, what is it we actually want to achieve? I want you to have sat down and written out a real goal. Later today I'm going to talk to you about why goal setting is so important, but I want you to have something that is really clearly laid out. This is what I want to achieve. And then you work out what role any of this technology might play in it. To give you some examples, this is work from the Sheep's House. So this is from quite a few years ago, but the wool price doesn't really matter because it's all relevant within the group of animals. The top 25% of animals within a commercial flock at that time were cutting $82 worth of wool. The average for the group of animals was only 54. So if the average is only 54, what's that tell us the bottom 25% were doing? Stuff all. Now, if we go to the number of lambs weaned, or percentage of lambs weaned, in that same group of animals, the top 25% were weaning 143% lambs. The average for the group was 86, so around where our average sort of numbers are for the industry, which means the bottom 25% were doing stuff all. 28% lambs marked or weaned out of that bottom 25%. Now, we know that some of these guys that aren't weaning many lambs are probably cutting us $82 worth of wool. And we know that some of these guys that are weaning all the lambs are probably only cutting us $37 worth of wool. But when you go looking, you'll also find that some of these guys are doing this, and some of these guys are doing this. But all we ever see is averages. This is 1,000 1.5-year-olds, fleece weighed and micron tested. This was a client that we had to do some work for a while ago. You'll hear people say that if we go chasing fleece weight, it's going to have an effect on micron. And it absolutely will. If we just go chasing micron, we know it's going to have an effect on fleece weight if we do them blindly. But if we know what's actually there, look at the variation that's going on. Look at how much opportunity. Anywhere there's variation, there's opportunity for us. This is those same animals just converted to wool value. And I start wondering, what are these sheep still doing there? If they're not cutting us enough dollars worth of wool, why have we still got them? This is actually, so Gordon, who was in that video, this is some of his growth rates from a few years ago. We calculated growth rates based on an average birth date and an average birth weight. And when I worked them out, I went, that can't be right. So we made them older and we made them heavier when they were born. And this is still the numbers that came out. So our industry talks about we want to achieve 300 grams a day. 300 grams a day is that line across there. And I say, why bother with 300 grams a day if we can be doing 400 grams a day? And we've got 500 grams a day happening across the top here. The most interesting part of this graph is when you know who those lambs are. The top 3 dots across here, none of them were singles. They were all born as twins, reared as twins. Now, I would have walked in, as a prime lamb specialist, I would have walked into that pen full of lambs and said single, 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 because we are always biased by what we're expecting to see, rather than what's actually happening. And that's the value of data. We can actually calculate how much each ewe is producing for us. So each one of these dots is a ewe, up the side is how many dollars worth of lamb she weaned for us. And I'll show you how we actually do that. But you can see, clearly we've got some that don't rear anything, therefore they're just a passenger in our system. We've got others that are punching out a huge amount. Why have we still got these sheep here? And the reason I really want to know it, for each of your flocks, is that nationally the weather has gone missing out of our system. Now the weathers were a great release valve for us, always, because no one ever gets emotionally attached to weathers. As soon as the pressure comes on, they're out the gate. Don't even blink an eye. The problem is that nationally we've gone to an almost 100% breeding system. And so when the pressure comes on, we are always, whether you like it or not, we are emotionally attached to ewes. And we don't make those same decisions. But what if we knew that we already didn't like them? What if we knew that they already weren't as good as the other sheep on the farm? In a heartbeat, we can bugger them off. Get them out of your system, adjust your stocking rate like we know we should in tougher times, but not have the huge effect on our stocking rate the whole time by not carrying enough sheep. We can just always continually put sheep to a terminal flock, or even within your beef herd, doing exactly the same thing. If we're going to have surplus heifers, sell surplus heifers from cows that you don't like. And make sure you're only retaining the heifers from the cows that you do like. It's exactly the same concept. So, where does EID fit? Because so far everything I've talked about doesn't need EID. We can do everything without EID. The reason that we're interested in EID is because it's more accurate, it's easier, it's faster, and that makes it more likely to happen. We all know as soon as we make something even the slightest bit more difficult, we're much less likely to do it. For those of you that are sheep producers, how many have a set of scales set up in your yards in a permanent location? So in other words, all you have to do is swing a gate and run sheep through it. Wow, that's more than I've ever seen before in a room. You will weigh sheep more often than those that have to take out a couple of panels, go and put it in, plug the indicator in, because it might only take us 4 minutes longer, but you have to spend that 4 minutes, and so we don't do it. If all you got to do is swing a gate, we'll just stick a couple of those lambs through and see what they weigh, you will do it more often for exactly the same reasons. So, how can we use EID? I want you to start thinking about it, but not in terms of, so I can show you really complex ways of using EID. I want you to think about how could I just use it really simply within my system. Now, the first thing you need to understand when you order tags is this concept called a bucket file. Bit of a strange name for it. But what happens is on the outside of your tag, you can have a printed visual number. And when we read a tag, it has an electronic number. And those two numbers have nothing to do with each other, except that they're matched up together in a bucket file. So that means that at any point, if I read a visual number, I can go to my bucket file and find what its RFID or its electronic number is. So we can use that to our advantage because they go together into the bucket file. So the simple way of making use of it. When we order electronic tags, you can get this visual number printed in any sequence you like. So it might be 1 to 4,000 or 1 to 2,000 or whatever your number of lambs is likely to be. And at lamb marking, what we can actually do is we can just track which of those tags go into which lambs at lamb marking. So if I've got a twin mob in, and I know they're all twin born and they might be by a particular team of sires or whatever, I just know that 1 to 385 went into that mob. Just write it down in your book. At any point in the future, so that might be 4 years later, pressure comes on, you need to make a decision on that age group of sheep, and you decide, I only want the twin born by this particular group of size. We can go back to the bucket file. We can find those that had the visual number of 1 to 385, and then we can draft them out using either a stick reader or an auto drafter. And that's our first chance to have used EID without having bought any equipment until that point where you need to actually implement the decision. All you had to do was track the numbers of tags that went into them at landmarking. We can keep it as simple as that or as complex as this. This is Pedigree Matchmaker. I'm sure you've seen it before at some stage. It's a panel reader set up on a single file entrance, sheep walking through. So this one, they're actually going to water. Water's a great attractant. It reads the tags of the lambs and the tags of the ewes and allows us to estimate which lambs belong to which ewes. Developed by the Sheep CRC, we've also played with it in cattle, and it definitely works in cattle as well. The concept is very clever and it absolutely does work. It's not great to implement, because if water is a really good attractant at the time, that's great. In our own circumstances, quite often there's green feed around, ewes are eating 20 odd kilos of water a day at that time. So water's not a great attractant. We've had to try and find other ways to coax them through, but it does allow us to try and match them. And you're going to hear from Emily later on about what AWI are doing with smart tags. That will very quickly overtake this. The reason I want to show it to you and what we're capable of is this is how we can produce a graph like this. Every one of these dots is a ewe. Up the side tells you how many kilos she's weaned. Because as soon as we know who the lambs belong to and we weigh them, we know how many kilos that ewe's produced for us. What do you think this gap through the middle might be? Yep, singles versus twins. Now for the last however many years I've been in this industry, 20 odd years, I've constantly heard people say, I just want one good single. One good single cannot compete with twins. And twins cannot compete with triplets. These are the triplets up here above this line. There are some challenges in keeping them alive, absolutely, and we need to keep working on that as an industry. But as long as we do that, singles can't compete with twins, twins can't compete with triplets. So if you want production out your gate, that's what we've got to try and target. This is just that converted to dollars, and we can actually, again, talk about which ones we kick out. We can even take it through to 2 years of data. So that is those same sheep over 2 years, how much did they actually do? And this allows for the fact that we've got some that rear singles in 1 year, twins in the next, others that are doing twins and triplets in both years. It allows us to try and actually get 2 years of data rather than making a snap decision just on one. The main role I actually see of EID is for you to stop making mistakes. And when I say stop making mistakes, I mean stop being misled by what we see. So some of that is if we just go chasing wool traits, really pretty wool, or lots of wool without worrying about micron, or we just chase micron and we don't worry about wool cut, or we don't realise that we're comparing twins versus singles. It's a classic in wool. If you don't know whether it was born as a twin or born as a single, you will disadvantage your twins every time. And over a long period of time, you will reduce the fertility of your flock. So it's trying to stop the mistakes. And the best example I can give you, this is some first cross ewes. This graph takes a bit of understanding, so bear with me. Don't try and figure it out yourself. I'm about to explain it to you. This is ewe live weight across the bottom. This is the number of kilos that they weaned up the side. And the colour of the dot is the condition score of the ewe at the time of weaning. Now, if I said to you, I'm going to draft off some ewes here because we need to offload some. And I'm going to do it visually at the drafting gate after weaning. Which ones am I likely to keep and which ones am I likely to chuck out? I'll keep the big, fat, shiny ones because they're going to look good. And I'm going to kick out the poorer ones. If you look at this graph, the poor ones are these guys up here. They're lighter in live weight, they're lower in condition score, and they've punched out a heap of kilos. And the big, fat, shiny ones that I keep are these guys down here. High condition score 4s, high live weight because they are condition score 4s, and yet they've actually done bugger all for us. And that's the problem when we work on either averages or on visual, without the objective measurement. They're the ones we should be kicking out, and yet they're the ones we're most likely going to keep. Ultimately, it does come back to why. If I go to you and said, imagine the dairy farmers of our country saying, we're just going to milk cows morning and night, we won't pay any attention to how much milk comes into the vat every day. Imagine for those of you that are croppers, imagine if you went and sowed the farm down and just worked out your total yield of wheat across the whole farm. Didn't worry about what each individual paddock did. Now we want to know which part of the paddock did it. And yet what are we doing in the sheep industry and the cattle industry? All we ever look at is the average of the whole lot instead of the individuals. And ultimately you cannot improve what you don't measure. But it always comes with a rider, because we can go and collect a whole lot of data, but unless we actually use it, it's a problem for us. And understanding the information is absolutely critical.
Das hier ist mein Sektor. Das hier ist das wichtigste Gerät des Küstenwächters. Das Gerät, das Überlebensradar.
Mayday, mayday. Hello, can you hear us? Can you hear us? Can you... Over. We are sinking. We are sinking.
Hello? This is the German Coast Guard.
We are sinking. We're sinking.
What are you thinking about?
You have to understand the information. And it is a real trap, because I know what happens when we get excited and we've got the technology, we start collecting a lot of data. But it's a complete waste of time and money unless you actually use it. Over the last 10 or 12 years, I've had so many people say to me, you should see all the data we've got. I've got all these spreadsheets. And I say to them, what are you going to do with it? And they say, I don't know, but it's going to be good. We're not here just to collect data, we're here to achieve outcomes. That's what you have to have in mind, is the outcome we're trying to achieve. Now, I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking to you about equipment, because that's this afternoon. You get a chance to go over and talk to people. Other than to say, in my time, this is the single biggest change in EID. The last 10 years have been fantastic. When I first started, all we had was that frustrating yellow all-flex stick reader that if anyone's ever owned one 10 years ago will know exactly what I'm talking about. And now we've got a whole bunch of new stick readers, different options with panel readers. We've got auto drafters, and auto drafters are fantastic. The property that I was managing, the first thing we bought, because I was feedlotting lambs, was an auto drafter. Nothing to do with EID. It was so that I could weigh lambs on my own and very quickly. That's how we were able to justify it. When we start putting EID into the system, you start to see what we can actually do with it. This next video we recorded at a client's place, and what we actually did, just to show you what it's capable of. All we do is rattle the sheep. So we've got some blues, some reds and some unrattled. Now that could be anything. That could be the reds, could be twins, the blues could be singles. We've just set up the auto drafter to draft them into their correct group. So it could be twins going left, singles going right. It could be born to a particular sire group going left, the others going right. It could be anything you could possibly want. The auto drafter gives you the capability to redraft it. It could be, those going left could be everything that had twins over the last 3 years in a row and was bred by a particular sire. You can get as complex as you like. The one thing I would say, though, with an auto drafter, or any handler, is that they're only as good as the lead up and how well you can get them to go in. And there's a couple of other little issues I'll just point out. This is why we were making this video. I only edited the nice little fancy bit for you. This is all the things that went wrong while we were trying to do it. This lead up isn't good enough before the auto drafter. So the ability to back up is a problem. It's a straight lead up, which I don't love as well. We had to close, because these were feedlot lambs, we had to close this gate in so it's only quite narrow, because otherwise they were trying to constantly get two in there, which works fine except for when you get that one that keeps shying every time it goes near it. The other thing is, at the moment, this panel reader's reading that sheep's ear. And so it's going to draft everything. Fortunately, that happened to be a red one, but it's going to draft everything out that way because it's reading its ear. So that's me saying, bugger off, get out of here. Panel readers read in both directions, so you need to be well aware of that. If we're trying to read that way, it will also read that way, so that needs to be fenced off out there. And it goes on. They actually came back around. We ended up with 2 standing there at one stage. You need to be aware that if you're going to set up the equipment, it is brilliant. The stuff it can do is brilliant, but you need the help to make sure you get all those things right and you don't make the same mistakes that the rest of us have made for the last 10 years. For those of you with cattle, we can do exactly the same with cattle. Auto drafting capability, it is fantastic. We talk about handlers. Handlers are great because we can do multiple tasks all at once. The one thing my one warning I always have with handlers is that we've had a number of clients bought them and with the justification of we'll crutch our own sheep. That's how we'll pay for it. You get about 50 in and decide that's a really crap idea. Because no matter how good you are, and no matter how good the handler is, there's only one of you and there's a lot of sheep still coming at you. So don't get trapped into that. As soon as we do have a handler and the animal is standing in front of you with its live weight, you can now get these variable rate drench guns so that the animal receives the dose that it should receive for its weight. It's a fantastic bit of technology. They aren't cheap. If you do have a handler and you haven't quite got to this step yet, my little cheats advice for you is hang 3 drench guns up that are all at different dose rates. Make sure you grab the right one for the weight of that one and you can save yourself a couple of grand. But they are very good. They do a great job. The one thing I would say is that we do have contractors available all across the country now. There are people who can offer the services for EID. So do you need to own the equipment? Particularly things like an auto drafter. If you're a merino sheep operation, and you look at everything that I've talked about and you think that would be so good if I could draft my sheep up based on micron and fleece weight. How often are you actually going to do that? And can you justify having 20 or 30 grand's worth of auto drafter sitting in the shed for that one time of year that you're actually going to do it? Do you want to manage your own data? A trap of being a farmer for all of us is that we're all a jack of all trades. And so we think, well, I'll manage my own data. And the time of day that we do it is about 9 o'clock at night. We're already a bit frazzled and we don't do a great job of it. So if you need to or you want to, then do your own data. But there are people out there who can do it much faster, much better, and it actually doesn't cost a hell of a lot. So think about what contractors there are and start with the basics. This 1,000 merino weaners that I talked about, that were all fleece weighed and micron tested, these guys were in their 70s. They had absolutely no interest in trying to work out how to drive the equipment. All they did was put in a different ear tag at landmarking. And then they paid for in-shed testing. So the fleece weight and micron was collected in the shed. They then sent their data off to be managed to create this sort of thing and come up with a draft list. And then they paid a contractor to arrive with the auto drafter to do the draft, to take the bottom 20% off. They did nothing different other than put a different tag in the ear. Because what they wanted to do was buy the outcome, not get wrapped up in the technology, which is exactly how we should be doing it. I just want to finish off by looking at what else is happening. Because when we talk about excitement, one of the things I want you to think about is what's happening in the processing sector. We've now got hook tracking systems that are being installed and it has been a terribly slow process. I've been involved in this for 8 years on the periphery. It is not a simple process because of the environment that a processor is, with hot, cold, electromagnetic fields, all these sorts of things. But what the technology will allow us to do is match the ear tag to the hook so that everywhere that carcass goes through the processing plant, they're going to know that that is that sheep that was alive on that farm. And so that we can match the data of its processing with the data on the farm. And the reason we're interested in that is that's a huge step for us as an industry, because at the moment all we're doing is we're measuring what we can do on farm and we're not getting a hell of a lot beyond the farm gate. So that's a big step for us. The other exciting part, I've got a couple of videos here coming up that are from Scott's Technologies, is this ability to be able to actually get an X-ray of the carcass as it comes through. So Scott's Technologies build robotics. And this shows you the animals going through the X-ray unit. And it produces an image like this. Now, the reason that you should be interested in this, and this is the work that's been done by MLA and together with Scott's Technology and a few others, is this ability to be able to actually estimate lean meat yield from that image. from the use of DEXA. So at some point in the future, we will see a payments-based system that is based on lean meat yield, which is exciting for the industry. Now, the reason that it's also exciting for the processors is what they can do with that image. So as you can see here, that whole image or that whole carcass has been mapped. And I'll show you what that does for them. The problem is, though, as an industry, if we just go chasing lean meat yield, it will have an effect on meat eating quality. And so this is a slide that Alex Ball gave me. This is some of the technology that's been worked on over the last few years to try and measure meat eating quality at chain speed. So in other words, while a carcass is coming through the processing sector, it can be matched back to that carcass to say, this is the meat eating quality for that individual carcass. And that's important because just like if we select only for micron or only for fleece weight, we will have a detrimental effect on either. If we just select for lean meat yield and we don't have a focus on meat eating quality, it will cause us a problem. So the hyperspectral camera, the impedance spectroscopy probe, there will be others, there will be new technologies coming that are going to continue to develop in this space. The reason the processors are interested in it though, in terms of the robotics, I just want to quickly show you what these Scott's Technology robots can do. So when I said to you before that carcass had been mapped, it means that every time it goes, these robots go to break that carcass down further, it knows exactly where to cut them. Where is the right spot for that individual carcass? So you'll see here with this next one, for one carcass, the right place to cut it is with straight blades. Carcass, the most efficient cut is going to be on an angle. Now this next bit shows you what they can do with a forequarter. So this robot's actually going to grab the forequarter and get another X-ray on it. As soon as it has that X-ray, it can then put in its cut lines that are going to be the most efficient and break that carcass or that forequarter down with a bandsaw. So that's pretty amazing. This next one just shows you, and the huge benefit for processors clearly of robotics is they can work 24 hours a day, they don't have hangovers, they don't smoke bongs, they don't do any of the things that can be a problem with workers, but so they give great efficiency to their system as well. I have quite a lot to do with the Victorian processors, and every single day, one of them that I talk to, every single day they are 30 people short. No matter how hard they try and no matter what they do, they are 30 people short. So the workforce is a real challenge for them. So that's clearly why it's interesting for them. The reason it's interesting for us is we get those other benefits, lean meat yield and a few of those other things. Just to show you what it's capable of though. We won't see this, I doubt we'll see this on too many Australian kill floors. This shows you what the technology is capable of. So this is about to bone out this hind quarter. Just while we're on it, if you look at the way these robots work and the way the uni joints work, the flexibility that it has, a whole bunch of that came out of the work that AWI did looking at robotic shearing. A whole bunch of those uni joints and the way these robots work actually was developed in that same process. So, I come back to that same question. What excites you about the sheep industry? I personally, or the cattle industry, personally, I think if you're not excited at the moment, I don't think you're ever going to be. With where we're at and the technology that's coming, if you're not excited now, I don't think you ever will be. The one thing I will say though is it's not the tools that are going to give you the outcomes that you're chasing. It's always going to be you. So I can put an amazing amount of technology in two different farmers' hands, and one of them will achieve what they set out to achieve and the other one will go broke. Because it's not the technology. Tags, equipment, technology, it does not make you money. Decisions make you money. So at the end of the day, it all comes back to you. Start off with a really simple plan. Keep it as simple as you possibly can. Now, whenever we're working with any of our clients, we have the same saying, I use it all the time. I don't particularly care how good you are at what you do now. I want you to know that whatever we do well today, we can do better tomorrow. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Nathan. Just got a quick question about the cost-benefit analysis of EID for someone not breeding their own replacement ewes.
Yeah, it's obviously more challenging if you're not breeding your own ewes, because a lot of the effects are cumulative when we're in a breeding system. The one thing, the cost benefit, for the last 12 years I've been asked about a cost benefit in EID, and every time my answer is the same. So we've been commissioned to write reports for Western Australian government, a whole bunch of people. It still comes back to the same thing. The only cost benefit that can be calculated is on the labour saving. So that's the only one that we can genuinely attribute to electronic ID, because the rest of it comes down to decisions. And so so we can do a case study and you can look at an individual circumstance where they did this and this and this and they achieved that outcome, but it's not EID that achieved the outcome. They could have done it with a visual tag. It's, like I said, it just makes it easier, faster and more likely to happen. So I actually honestly think EID is a major catalyst rather than necessarily a particular solution. It's a catalyst for change and being able to collect the data and being more likely to do it. But back to your question on not being self-replacing, it is absolutely more difficult to justify in that scenario. The one biggest advantage is if you're buying ewes in, if you've already got a really good source that you're buying sheep from, and you're really comfortable with their performance, then there's even less. If you're getting from multiple sources, the ability to track performance over multiple years and work out where your better performing sheep are coming from is a significant one, even for feedlotters. So feedlotters are the shortest term users of EID because ideally we're going to have them for as little time as possible. But the ability to be able to track individual performance under exactly the same circumstances, in other words, mixed mobs, and be able to pull that apart is a significant one for people.
Yeah, thanks, Nathan. Quick question about Pedigree Matchmaker. I suppose the cost of Pedigree Matchmaker, particularly if you take into account the time of setting up and all that sort of stuff, and also the accuracy and how that compares perhaps with DNA and other options.
Yeah, so cost-wise, it clearly comes down to how you go about it. So we can get it, when you can hire the panels, which you can hire panels from providers, then you can actually get that cost quite low. So, but generally speaking, you would expect to run Pedigree Matchmaker for 4 weeks. So it is a prolonged period. You set it up, you need to try and keep sheep going in and out for 4 weeks. The fastest I've ever managed to get it to work is 12 days with 95% accuracy, which is pretty good, particularly in a commercial scenario. If it's a stud scenario, I'd say you wouldn't even think about it. Just go straight to DNA because of the other benefits you can get. I also think that, so I've done a lot of Pedigree Matchmaker in the last 10 years because we wanted to see what we were capable of with it. It can be incredibly frustrating. So I like to show you what the outcome can be as soon as we have Pedigree within a commercial system. I don't recommend that everyone runs out and tries to do Pedigree Matchmaker. It can be pretty frustrating. So I think wait for Emily's talk later on in the day about smart tags. That's what will replace Pedigree Matchmaker in a commercial sense. In a stud sense, I would be looking at DNA. The other benefits you get are too great. There is also, there is also the risk of complete failure. So you may well set up your Pedigree Matchmaker and in that particular year, due to something, you go to do the data and there's not the accuracy in it. There's been a couple of different trials done comparing the accuracy of it with DNA and things like that. Conflicting results, but around that 90, 95%, 85%, somewhere in that range, depending on the conditions that the Pedigree Matchmaker was done under. So when we did it, we compared it to paddock matching. So we had a studs data and then put them through, and we got 95% compared to paddock matching. All of them have their flaws though. If you're matching in the paddock in a stud sense, there will be fostering that happens before you get there. If you're doing DNA and you've got really close linkages within your mob, then there's some inaccuracies in that as well. So none of them are 100%. It's okay. It's better than nothing.
I think we've got time for one more, Jodie. Oh, Jodie's got a question.
Nathan, did you want to say something about chips in dogs and EID?
Yep, so it is exactly the same technology in your dogs as what's in the e-tag. So if your dogs run near your reader, run through your reader, you will read them. The most I've ever seen in a file was 7 dogs. I don't know what they were doing in the yards that day, but they had a lot of dogs with them. So it will read them. The technology is not, this is not some fancy new technology. RFID has been around for 30 years. It's the same technology that beeps when you walk out of a shopping centre with something you're not supposed to have. It's the same technology that allows us to tap and go with our credit cards. It's really basic technology. It's just that it's been put into an ear-tag and we can use it to our own benefits.
I guess Victoria hung their hat on the fact that it was security, so the sheep would never be stolen. From experience, we know some people cut tags out. How far are we off of getting chips, as in injectable chips for the ears, like they do in pets, but down at ear tag costings?
I'll tackle this a couple of different ways. So security, it doesn't work for security. It works for biosecurity, 100%. That's why Victoria went that way. Security, it doesn't work because we can always cut the tags out of animals. So that the reason it can help from a security point of view is that people aren't terribly diligent when they're doing things, and so one tag that gets missed gets picked up, in Victoria, gets picked up in the system as someone selling your sheep. So I get a notification if someone sells one of my sheep, and it says, why are they selling your sheep? That's how it can work from that point of view. In terms of going to boluses or chips, the problem is in sheep, if you put in it happens in dogs too. If you ever go to get a dog microchip red, you'll notice that they scan the whole animal. That's because they move. So we put them in the ear and they still move. You try and put them wherever they will still move. If I was out stealing sheep and you had boluses, all I would do is put 2 or 3 more boluses in there. Because if we have 2 chips in the same read range, it won't read them. So maybe that's just me being devious, but I can find a way around it. Unfortunately, when it comes to people doing the wrong thing, there is always a way. Doesn't matter what we do.
Speaking of Victoria's sort of mandatory move to EID and sheep, you did mention before about it's the actual person in the business that makes a difference rather than the tools. Or I heard the other day, it's the jockey, not the horse.
Yep.
Going to that mandatory move, are people just doing the bare minimum, or have you seen like a behaviour change in sheep farmers in Victoria about what they're doing with that tech?
There's both, absolutely there's both. So I think it's the single best catalyst for the change, for the uptake of the technology, because as soon as there's already a tag in their ear, one of your major decisions is already gone. Whether it's a financial one or not actually doesn't matter. The fact that you have to go and put tags in is another hurdle to you actually using it. So them already having tags in means that people are much more likely to just go and, I'll just use it for just that little job, which is actually how I want you to use EID anyway. I want you to use it for the really small, simple things that help you achieve your goal. That's much more likely when the tag's already in their ear, when they already have to have it. So definitely it's been a catalyst. I wouldn't say it's been massive. Like it's not, we haven't got 95% of people in Victoria out there reading tags and doing things. There's still a huge percentage of people that will only ever do the bare minimum. And to some degree, I'm quite happy with that because most people have bigger fish to fry. When I go into a business, I don't go in there looking and going, I know exactly what you need to use EID. That's what's going to solve our problem here. Most sheep and cattle businesses I go into, we've got a list that's 10 or 15 things long of things we need to focus on. The advantage of EID is that along that process, we can bank data that will allow us to then go back and pull that flock down or sort that herd out later on once we've got numbers. The one thing nationally is I don't know too many people that have got enough sheep at the moment. So you look across Victoria, we've had great seasons when New South Wales was going through drought and when you guys have had a tough time over here, and yet none of my clients have got enough sheep. They've been building numbers for the last 5 years and they still haven't got there. So if it's got a mouth and a heartbeat, it stays at the moment. Now that puts us in a tough position in say 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 years time when we finally get the flock to settle. Then we've got to start making some decisions and working on information we've already got to kick some animals out. So that will be where it comes in. I think we've got people banking information without necessarily using it just yet.